Morning. Good morning. We'll get started now. Um, Today is October 27th. I will acknowledge that we are a week out from the election and we're not talking about the election. So we are in the week of Lech Lecha, and we're going to talk about the Parsha. As with most of the Parshiot, particularly in Genesis, this is jam-packed. This is the Parsha where Abram and Sarai start their journey. They have a bunch of adventures along the way. Sarai is unable to conceive and Hagar becomes her surrogate. And the Parsha ends with the establishment of circumcision as the sign of the covenant. So there's a lot here. There are four themes in particular that stood out for me, and I'm going to briefly mention each of them in reverse order of where they occurred in the Parsha. So the first thing I'm mentioning is toward the end of the Parsha, where Abram and Sarai have name changes, and Abram becomes Abraham and Sarai becomes Sarah. And this really reminded me of the importance of names and of choosing your names. And I ended up really thinking about my childhood nickname and how deliberate I was in giving that up to become Fran. And what happens now when every once in a while someone spontaneously, who did not know me as a child, calls me Franny, which was my childhood nickname. And what happens now when someone calls me Franny is I feel very light, I feel young, I feel energetic, and fun-loving and not so serious. And I deliberately became Fran to prove my maturity. I was the youngest in my family and I was always the, quote, irresponsible one. And, so I needed to prove that I could be responsible. So I became Fran. So it really is very interesting to me how powerful names can be, and names are. And I know people who have changed their names legally after a serious illness. So names are powerful, and we, most of us, I think, maybe all of us, really appreciate it when people use our names. So this whole name change piece caught my attention. Then stepping back a couple of pages in the Chumash, I was intrigued by the barrenness and fertility and the issue of surrogacy. And for me, this really highlighted the pain and very real anguish that some people experience when they feel that their bodies are letting them down. And particularly notable when people who want to have children are unable to. And I was also really struck by the very complicated relationships among Sarai, her slave Hagar, and her husband Abram. All these relationships are complex, and they really played out in very challenging ways. But it got me thinking about how, frankly, all relationships are complex. And we do well when we step back and recognize that relationships are complicated. And it helps us when in relationship, if we can remember that and probably be a little bit wiser about how we respond to the people we're in relationship with. And then there's this whole notion of deceit. Abram asks Sarai to pretend that she is his sister, not his wife. The asks is in quotes because I don't think she had much of a choice here. And he clearly does this to protect himself. I mean, he states that in the Torah. He knows that Sarai is beautiful and that the Pharaoh will want her. So let's make it easy on me and you just be with him. On page 62 in the Women's Torah Commentary, it says, "This passage is not a tale about unethical behavior, but a story of marginalized persons who succeed in roundabout, unorthodox ways." I am not a Torah scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but when I read that, I said, I can't buy it. So for me, that took courage to even argue with the printed page. As far as I'm concerned, he played pimp to her prostitute. And I think it's pretty unpleasant. I could use the despicable word, but maybe I won't go there. Sarai ended up doing to Hagar just as Abram did to her. She forced Hagar into prostitution, in a sense, by having Hagar sleep with Abraham so that she could become pregnant. So for me, there's this example of the victim becoming the perpetrator. But the whole sequence of events is one of many examples, I think, throughout the Torah of our ancestors being flawed humans. They are people and they are not perfect. And I think that that can serve the purpose for us of providing us with some compassion and understanding and kindness for the flawed humans around us, including ourselves. So that's part of what really got stirred up for me with that piece of the story. And then lastly, but first in the Parsha, is Abram and Sarai setting out on their journey without knowing the destination. They were following God's directive, and they didn't know where they were going. And that's intimidating, scary, unsettling, to say the least. We're constantly on journeys without known destinations. We do it all the time because we never know what challenges are going to come our way. We may think we have a destination in mind. We may be planning something, but something's going to change inevitably and cause us to rethink our route, figure out a different way, and pivot. And that's really a big part of the journey. It's being able to adapt, being resilient, and thoughtful in our responses. Letting go of the expectations that the journey is going to be a particular way. So I was at a wedding yesterday. This was a wedding that was planned over a year ago. The wedding was supposed to be a grand affair with 250 people in a ballroom, la-di-da, very la-di-da. The wedding couple, the bride and groom, decided that they absolutely insisted on being married on that day that they had picked. So the wedding was not in a ballroom. It was in a barn and outside of a barn under a tent. It was not 250 people, it was 50 people. It was not in ball gowns and long dresses and cocktail attire. It was yesterday, you might recall, cold and rainy. It was 2 days ago, cold and rainy. So people were bundled up. So there's a pivot. Um, so there's always this need to really keep in mind the big picture and the overarching goal, overarching destination. So as we sit today, I invite you to form an intention for this particular sit. And it could be as simple as a period of time to relax or a period of time to have just some quiet. Or maybe you want to bring to mind one of the topics that I just shared, whatever works for you. But whatever your focus is and whatever your intention is, I encourage you to stay with it for the duration of our sit together. So now, taking your seat, sitting in your relaxed yet regal position, I invite you to take a few cleansing breaths, inhaling as fully as you can, and exhaling slowly and completely through your mouth. And doing that twice more at your own pace. And feeling the points of contact that you have with your chair or your cushion or the floor. Allowing yourself to fully settle, really being supported where you're sitting. And we'll sit in silence for about 10 minutes. So as you are coming back into the room from your meditation, I'm going to share a poem with you entitled Lech Lecha by Andrea L. Weiss. Go forth on a journey. Go by yourself. Standing at a crossroads, you venture from the known to the unknown. Some journeys must be made alone. Go to yourself. Spiral inward and unwrap your past and your potential. Remember that the soul which you have made is unique and holy. Go for yourself. Smell the fragrance which spreads across the land as you roam and wander. Refresh yourself under the tree which grows by a spring at the side of the road. Make your name great and make your life a blessing.